What was the most classist lunch policy at your school? Students with unpaid lunch debt couldn't attend field trips, prom, or graduation ceremonies until balances were cleared. When my friend's family couldn't pay $47, they made her sit in the auditorium alone during the 8th grade trip she'd fundraised for all year. The principal resigned 6 months later rather than face charges. The cafeteria director took early retirement when auditors found $340,000 missing from the food service budget. My best friend Sadie transferred schools halfway through 9th grade after her testimony went public. I'm still here, watching buses pull away for field trips, knowing exactly what those empty seats cost. Sadie and I met in 6th grade during a fundraiser for the 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip. We were selling candy bars door to door, keeping track of every dollar because the trip cost $850 per student, and our families didn't have that kind of money. She lived 3 blocks from me, where houses needed paint and cars sat on blocks in driveways. Her mom worked doubles at the hospital as a nursing assistant. My dad drove delivery trucks. We understood each other without explaining. The fundraising took 2 years. Car washes every weekend, bake sales at every school event, magazines, wrapping paper, cookie dough, anything the school told us would help. Sadie kept a notebook with every dollar earned. $127 after 6 months, $340 by the end of 7th grade, $680 by January of 8th grade, just $170 more, and she'd finally see the monuments we'd been reading about since elementary school. I hit my goal first. My grandmother sent me $200 for my birthday. Sadie didn't have grandparents who could help. Just her mom, working doubles, putting every spare dollar toward rent and groceries. The lunch account thing started small. Sadie would tell the cafeteria worker she forgot her lunch money. They'd give her a meal and add it to her account. $3.50 here, $4.25 there. By March, her balance was negative $35. The first letter came home in a manila envelope marked, "Urgent. Your student's lunch account is past due. Payment must be made immediately or privileges will be revoked." Sadie's mom called the school, explaining she'd pay when she got her next check, but cafeteria director Mrs. Vance said school policy required immediate payment. No exceptions. The debt climbed to negative $51 by April. Then the second letter came. Students with outstanding balances exceeding $50 are ineligible for extracurricular activities, including field trips, dances, and graduation ceremonies, until all debts are cleared. Sadie showed it to me during lunch with shaking hands. The Washington, D.C. trip was in 3 weeks. She'd fundraised $820 of the required $850. She needed $30 more for the trip itself, but she owed $51 for lunches. I offered to pay it. I had birthday money saved. She refused, said her mom would handle it, but I could see the fear in her eyes. That night, I heard my parents talking about how Sadie's mom had been asking for extra shifts, but the hospital wasn't giving them. Medical bills were crushing them since Sadie's little brother needed surgery last year. The lunch debt was the least of their problems, but somehow it was the thing that would cost Sadie this trip. The weekend before the trip, Sadie's mom went to the school with $51 in cash. Mrs. Vance counted it slowly, then informed her that late fees had been added. The balance was now $65. Sadie's mom only had $51. Mrs. Vance said she couldn't accept partial payment. School policy. All or nothing. Sadie's mom left crying. Sadie texted me a photo of the rejection letter. Your payment was insufficient. Balance remains at $65. Student is ineligible for trip participation. The fundraising coordinator, Ms. Keene, called my mom that night. She was furious. Sadie had earned $820 through 2 years of legitimate fundraising. The school was keeping her from the trip over a lunch debt that had ballooned through their own fee system. Ms. Keene tried arguing with Principal Novak. He cited district policy. His hands were tied. Ms. Keene said that was garbage, but he wouldn't budge. Monday morning, Sadie came to school with her permission slip and her $820 fundraising money, trying one last time. The office secretary, Phyllis, who'd worked there 30 years, actually cried when she had to tell Sadie no. Phyllis had tried talking to Principal Novak over the weekend. He told her the policy existed for a reason. Couldn't make exceptions or everyone would want one. Phyllis said she'd never seen a child's face crumple like that. Wednesday was the trip. The buses arrived at 5 a.m., 127 8th graders loaded up with their packed lunches and cameras. Sadie sat in the auditorium with Mr. Grady, the janitor assigned to supervise her. The school couldn't let her go home. Her mom was working. They couldn't send her to regular classes. So she sat in the auditorium for 14 hours while we saw the Lincoln Memorial. I didn't enjoy a single moment. None of us in Sadie's friend group did. We took pictures in front of the Capitol building and texted them to her. She sent back a photo of the empty auditorium chairs, just rows and rows of red velvet seats with her sitting alone in the middle. Mr. Grady had given her his newspaper to read. That's what a $65 lunch debt bought you. A newspaper and an empty auditorium while everyone else saw the Smithsonian. When we pulled into the school parking lot at 8 p.m., I saw Sadie's mom's car still there. She'd come straight from her shift to pick her up. Sadie walked out looking smaller somehow, like something had been taken that couldn't be given back. Her mom hugged her in the parking lot, and I watched them both cry. Over $65, over lunch. over a system that punished poor kids for being hungry. Thursday in English class, our teacher asked everyone to share their favorite part of the trip. Sadie sat silent. Everyone knew. The girl who'd fundraised harder than anyone. She'd been excluded. After class, I heard two kids laughing about how Sadie couldn't even afford school lunch. That's when I snapped. I grabbed one kid and shoved him against the lockers. A teacher pulled me off. I got 3 days in school suspension. Principal Novak called my parents in. My dad asked him if starving kids through debt was acceptable. Novak said that was a separate issue. The meeting went badly. Novak sat behind his desk explaining school discipline policies, while my mom asked about lunch debt policies. He kept redirecting to my behavior, my violence, my inability to control my emotions. My dad finally stood up and said we were done listening to a man who punished children for being poor lecture us about appropriate behavior. Novak threatened to extend my suspension. My dad said, go ahead, that we'd be talking to a lawyer anyway about what happened to Sadie. Novak's face went red. My mom started making phone calls that night, to other parents, to friends who worked in education, to anyone who might know if what happened to Sadie was actually legal. Most people said probably not, but proving it would be difficult. School districts had broad authority. Unless someone could show discrimination or violation of specific statutes, the policy would likely stand. My mom wasn't satisfied with probably. My mom posted about it in a parents' Facebook group. Within an hour, she had 40 responses. Families sharing their own lunch debt stories. Kids who'd been excluded from field trips, dances, even graduation ceremonies. Parents who'd been harassed by collection agencies over school lunch bills. One woman said her son's insulin had to be kept in the nurse's office, but the nurse withheld it one day because the family owed lunch money. The pattern was clear. This wasn't isolated, it was systematic. During suspension, I sat doing worksheets and thinking about what my dad said. Starving kids. I remembered Sadie's lunches getting smaller over the months. She'd started skipping breakfast entirely. Sometimes she'd split her lunch with her brother. I'd assumed they couldn't afford groceries. But what if she'd been starving herself to avoid adding to her lunch debt? What if she'd been trying to keep the balance from climbing? The suspension room had 2 other kids. During the bathroom break, one told me why he'd been skipping class. His family owed $340 in lunch debt across him and his 2 siblings. Every time he walked into the cafeteria, the workers would announce his balance loud enough for everyone to hear. He'd started leaving campus during lunch to avoid the humiliation. Got caught, got suspended. Now his lunch debt had grown to $380 with the late fees. He was 15. He didn't have a job. His mom worked at a gas station. There was no money to pay back. When I got back, I started paying attention to the lunch line. Kids who'd reach for a full tray, then put items back when the worker shook her head and pointed at a computer screen. Students who took only milk and bread. Free lunch kids still being charged because their paperwork wasn't processed yet. The debt system was everywhere once you knew to look for it. One girl would get in line, pick up a tray, then put it back and leave without eating. She did this every day. I finally asked her about it. She said her family owed $220. Every time she tried to get lunch, the cafeteria worker would ask if she had money to pay down her balance. She didn't, so she'd leave. She'd been eating granola bars from her locker for 6 weeks. Her stomach hurt all the time. Her grades were dropping. Ms. Keene, the fundraising coordinator, pulled me aside after school one day. She told me something I'll never forget. The district had implemented the policy 3 years ago. Before that, kids with lunch debt just got a basic meal: cheese sandwich, fruit, milk. Then the new food service company came in. Within 6 months, the policy changed. Kids with debt got nothing unless parents paid. The company said it would incentivize payment. Instead, it incentivized starvation. Sadie stopped talking to most people after the trip. She'd sit with me at lunch, not eating anything, just drinking water from the fountain. Her grades dropped. She'd been a straight A student. Now she was pulling C's and D's. Her mom called the school worried about depression. The guidance counselor suggested Sadie needed better coping skills for disappointment. Didn't mention that the disappointment was manufactured by their own policies. I watched her disappear over those weeks. She stopped raising her hand in class, stopped making jokes with our friends, stopped talking about her plans for high school. Teachers noticed, but attributed it to typical teenage moodiness. Nobody connected it to the trauma of systematic exclusion. Her little brother started acting out at school too, getting in fights, talking back to teachers. He'd watched his sister cry every night. He understood, at 8 years old, that their family wasn't good enough, that poverty was punishment. The newspaper ran a tiny article about the school board meeting. 3 paragraphs, buried on page 11. Local parents raised concerns about school lunch debt policies. No names, no specific stories, just sanitized language that made systematic harm sound like a minor disagreement about administrative procedures. My mom was furious. She'd spent an hour detailing specific harms. The newspaper reduced it to 3 bloodless paragraphs. In May, another letter went out threatening to withhold 8th grade graduation ceremony participation. Sadie owed $78 now. The balance kept growing even though she'd stopped eating school lunch completely. When I asked Mrs. Vance about it, she explained that fees accrued monthly on unpaid balances. Interest on a child's lunch debt. My mom said that couldn't be legal. My dad said legal and right weren't always the same thing. The week before graduation, my mom went to the school board meeting. She brought printed copies of every lunch debt letter our friend group had collected. There were 43 students at our school alone who owed money. The total debt was $8,000. The board chairman said the debt proved families weren't taking personal responsibility seriously. My mom asked how an 8th grader was supposed to take personal responsibility for poverty. The meeting got heated. One dad pointed out that the school's contract with the cafeteria company included a provision where the company got to keep any debt collections, creating an incentive to let balances grow. A mom in the back shouted that her daughter was eating paper to feel full because she was too ashamed to get lunch with her debt balance displayed publicly. The board ended the meeting early, but not before Mr. Westerly, the board chairman, made a statement that got recorded. He said that in his day, kids who couldn't afford lunch brought food from home, that today's parents wanted everything handed to them without earning it. That school lunch debt was a natural consequence of poor planning. The room erupted. One mom stood up. Her name was Keisha Rollins. She said the cruelty was new. The systematic extraction of money from poor families was new. Westerly told her she was out of order. Security escorted her out. The video went viral locally. Comment sections filled with divided opinion. My mom organized a follow-up meeting with affected families. 23 parents showed up. They brought documentation. One family had paid $180 toward their $200 balance, only to have late fees bring it back up to $245. They'd been paying for 7 months and owed more than when they started. The parents formed a coalition, called it Families Against Lunch Debt Exploitation, FALDE for short. My mom became vice president. Keisha Rollins became president. 3 days before graduation, Principal Novak announced a one-time debt forgiveness program. All lunch balances would be cleared. Students could participate in graduation regardless of their accounts. He framed it as an act of mercy. My mom called it covering their tracks before someone filed a lawsuit. Sadie could walk at graduation, but she'd never get her 8th grade trip back. The damage was permanent. Summer came, and we both got jobs at a grocery store. We worked together most shifts, not talking much about school. One afternoon in July, she told me her family was moving to a different district. Her mom found a better-paying job across town. Sadie would start 9th grade at a new school where nobody knew about the auditorium or how she'd been excluded from her own childhood over pocket change. I asked if she was okay. She said she wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. She'd learned that fairness was a lie adults told kids to keep them compliant, that working hard didn't guarantee anything, that the system could take away what you'd earned because of what you couldn't afford. She was 14 years old, talking like someone who'd already lived through a war. In some ways, she had. August brought news that Principal Novak was under investigation. Someone had filed a complaint with the state education department about the lunch debt policies, then another complaint about the interest fees, then a formal audit request for the food service budget. Parents were demanding answers about how lunch debt was being managed and why children were being excluded from activities. The district tried to control the narrative, sent a letter to all families explaining that lunch debt policies were designed to ensure financial sustainability, that interest fees reflected administrative costs. The letter included a payment plan option. Families could pay their debt in installments over 6 months with a processing fee and continued interest. The Parents' Coalition calculated that families would pay nearly double their original debt. FALDE organized a protest. 70 parents and students showed up outside the district office. Local news covered it. Interviews with parents. Interviews with Keisha Rollins, who said children were being systematically harmed. The coverage brought more families forward. Parents from neighboring districts reporting identical policies, same debt collection, same exclusions, same food service company. The pattern was regional, maybe national. The audit results leaked before official release. Someone inside the district office sent documents to FALDE. The findings were damning. Mrs. Vance had structured the contract to personally benefit from debt collection. Principal Novak had signed off on provisions he either didn't read or didn't care to understand. The food service company had systematically overcharged for meals, added fees with no cost basis, and split the collections with district administrators who approved the scheme. The audit took 4 months. In December, the results came out. Mrs. Vance had been taking kickbacks from the food service company. For every dollar of debt collected, she received a percentage. She'd been actively preventing debt forgiveness programs and adding fees to increase her personal take. The contract split debt collections 60-40 between company and district, except Mrs. Vance was skimming from the district's portion. She'd stolen $127,000 over 6 years. Principal Novak claimed he didn't know. The audit showed he'd signed off on the contract with the debt-splitting provision. He'd approved the interest fee structure. He'd rejected multiple teacher requests to implement debt forgiveness. Either he knew and allowed it, or he was criminally negligent. The superintendent recommended his immediate resignation. He fought it until the board threatened charges. He resigned in January. Mrs. Vance was arrested. She was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and 15 counts of child abuse for withholding food from students who couldn't pay. Her lawyer argued she was following company policy. The prosecutor argued she'd designed the policy to maximize her theft. She took a plea deal, 5 years in prison, restitution of $340,000 to the district and affected families. Sadie's family got a check for $2,400. The food service company lost their contracts with every district in the county. The board hired an interim administrator who immediately eliminated all lunch debt. Free breakfast and lunch for every student regardless of income. They found the money by cutting administrative salaries and renegotiating the food contract. Turned out feeding kids didn't have to involve theft and abuse. It just required adults who actually wanted to feed kids. I ran into Sadie in March. She was back visiting her mom for spring break. She'd settled into her new school, made new friends. She asked if I'd heard about Mrs. Vance's sentencing. I said I had. She told me it didn't feel like justice. The woman would serve maybe 3 years with good behavior. Sadie would spend the rest of her life remembering that auditorium, those empty chairs. The way her childhood ended over a lunch debt that should never have existed. We sat in her mom's living room and she told me about her new school. It was in a wealthier district. No debt. If your account ran out, they'd call your parents, but you'd still get a full meal. No shame. No public announcements. She'd been shocked the first time she forgot lunch money, and the cafeteria worker just smiled and told her to grab whatever she wanted. Just kindness. Just food. Just a system designed to feed children instead of punish them. Her grades had improved. Slowly. She'd pulled her GPA back up to a 3.6. Her counselor had written a recommendation letter that referenced personal challenges overcome, without specifying what those challenges were. Sadie was grateful for the discretion. That story didn't fit the inspirational narrative colleges wanted. It was just sad, uncomfortable, easier to omit. Sadie's mom had been ostracized at the hospital, not by everyone, but a few, including one supervisor, had made comments about troublemakers. The supervisor was married to a school board member. Sadie's mom had filed a workplace harassment complaint. It was being investigated. Slowly, the whole family was learning that challenging powerful institutions had ripple effects. My high school had a journalism class. I signed up sophomore year and pitched a story about lunch debt policies and student exclusion. My teacher loved it. She helped me file public records requests for contracts, financial records, and discipline policies from multiple districts. What we found was systematic, not isolated to one school. A nationwide system of punishing poverty under the guise of teaching financial responsibility to children who couldn't legally work. The article ran in the school paper, then got picked up by the local news. Other students started contacting me with their own stories. Kids barred from prom over $20. Students who couldn't graduate until their families paid off lunch debts from years earlier. A ninth grader whose college recommendation letters were withheld because she owed $115. Each story followed the same pattern: debt accrual, interest fees, exclusion, shame. The response was immediate and divided. My journalism teacher received calls from the superintendent's office demanding to know why she'd allowed such inflammatory content. She told them it was factual reporting. They suggested she reconsider her teaching priorities. She said she'd be looking for jobs in other districts, that standing up for students meant professional consequences. Other students wanted to join the investigation. I formed a team, 5 of us splitting different research angles: financial records, similar policies in other districts, personal stories, legal precedents, the food service company history. We found that the company was owned by a private equity firm. They'd purchased 12 struggling cafeteria service companies, merged them, and implemented aggressive cost-cutting and debt collection. Their business model was simple: provide the cheapest possible food while maximizing debt generation. Most districts either didn't understand this or didn't care because it solved their budget problems by creating family budget crises. My article expanded into a multi-part series. 5 articles over 5 weeks: the financial exploitation, the psychological harm, the legal violations, the company's broader practices, policy solutions other districts had implemented. My journalism teacher helped me refine each piece. She taught me that investigative journalism isn't about opinions. It's about facts arranged to reveal truth that powerful people want hidden. National outlets started calling. The story was bigger than one district. It was about how America treated its poorest children, how we'd criminalized hunger and called it policy. The interviews were exhausting. Everyone wanted Sadie to tell her story. She refused. She'd moved on. Didn't want to be the poster child for lunch debt trauma. By senior year, 3 states had banned lunch debt interest fees. 5 more had prohibited excluding students from activities over unpaid balances. Federal legislation was introduced to eliminate school lunch debt entirely. None of it would help Sadie. Her 8th grade trip was gone. Her trust in institutions was destroyed. The reforms helped future kids, but the ones who'd suffered would carry the scars. College started in the fall. I studied journalism. During my first semester, I got an email from Sadie. She was at State, studying social work. She decided to help kids navigate the systems that had hurt her, turn her trauma into protection for others. She said she'd been following my articles, said they mattered, said someone needed to keep remembering what happened when everyone else wanted to forget. Freshman year, I started a nonprofit with 3 students who'd experienced lunch debt exclusion. We called it No Child Left Hungry: local fundraising, community outreach, documenting stories from affected families. By sophomore year, we had chapters in 15 states. By junior year, we'd helped pass legislation in 8 states banning lunch debt interest fees. The organization grew faster than expected. Students across the country reached out wanting to start chapters. Within 18 months, we had 3,000 volunteer members, a board of directors, and enough funding to hire 2 full-time staff. We developed a toolkit for students starting advocacy campaigns: how to document violations, how to organize communities, how to engage media, how to pressure school boards without getting expelled. Our first major victory came in Connecticut. A 15-year-old organized her entire school to refuse cafeteria food for a week. The district lost $40,000 in meal revenue. The district panicked. The student presented documentation of illegal debt collection. The district eliminated lunch debt the next day. We used her playbook in 12 other districts that year. But success brought scrutiny. Conservative think tanks published reports claiming we were radicalizing children. We responded with data showing universal free meals improved academic performance. 3 weeks after we launched, an anonymous email arrived. The subject line read, "You need to see this." Inside was a PDF, 15 pages of internal memos from the district office dating back 8 years. The memos showed that administrators had known about the kickback scheme from the beginning. They'd approved it, encouraged it, celebrated it as innovative revenue generation. The documents were explosive. Email chains between the superintendent, Principal Novak, Mrs. Vance, and food service company executives. They'd workshopped the debt collection system together, discussed how to maximize fees without triggering legal challenges, calculated how much money they could extract from poor families. The language was cold, clinical. They talked about children's hunger like spreadsheet line items. One memo stood out. The assistant superintendent's lunch debt ROI analysis detailed projected revenue from interest fees and collection actions. It included demographic data showing which neighborhoods had the highest poverty rates and therefore the most potential for debt generation. It recommended targeted enforcement in those areas, strategic exploitation of the poorest families because they had the least capacity to fight back. I forwarded everything to my journalism teacher first. She verified the documents were authentic. Then we sent copies to my mom, the Fall D Coalition, lawyer Desmond Burke, and 3 news outlets. We had to protect ourselves, make sure the truth would survive. Burke called within an hour. The memos proved conspiracy, showed systematic intent to harm poor families for financial gain. This wasn't incompetence, it was malice. The anonymous source sent more documents over the next week. Budget files, personnel reviews where Mrs. Vance received bonuses for maximizing collections, board meeting minutes, recorded calls where district officials discussed revenue extraction. Each new document made the conspiracy harder to deny. We never learned who the source was. They used encrypted email and disappeared after the final drop. Someone who'd watched the system harm children and couldn't stay silent anymore. One memo from the assistant superintendent praised Mrs. Vance for creating a system that turned the lunch program from a loss center into a profit generator. Another discussed expanding the debt collection model to library fines and damaged textbook fees. A third outlined projections for how much money they could extract from families over 10 years. They'd turned child poverty into a business model and documented it in writing. I forwarded everything to my mom. She contacted a lawyer named Desmond Burke, who'd been looking for a case like this. He said the documents proved conspiracy and racketeering. Within a week, Burke had 60 families signed on as plaintiffs. Sadie's mom was one of them. He filed in federal court, asking for $15 million in damages plus elimination of all existing lunch debt in every district the food service company operated. In the meantime, the story exploded. National news picked it up after a congressional committee announced hearings on school lunch debt practices. Sadie's mom testified before Congress. She brought photos of the letters. She held up the rejection notice from when she'd tried to pay $51 and been told it wasn't enough. She described finding her daughter crying in her bedroom the night before the trip. The testimony went viral. Millions of views. Comments flooded in from parents and former students sharing similar stories. A woman in Ohio whose son had been banned from senior prom over $30. A family in Texas whose daughter's diploma was held hostage until they paid $85. A single father in Michigan threatened with truancy charges when his kids stopped going to school because they were too ashamed of their lunch debt. The pattern was everywhere. The trial happened in my junior year. I took a semester off to attend every day. The courtroom was packed. Burke had organized the case brilliantly. Each day brought a different plaintiff. Parents harassed by collection agencies. Students publicly shamed when their negative balances were announced. The testimonies were devastating. Day 1 was Sadie's mom. She described the fundraising, the debt, the rejection of partial payment, and finding Sadie crying in her room surrounded by fundraising materials. The jury was silent. One juror was crying. The district's lawyer tried to establish that Sadie's mom should have paid sooner. Burke objected repeatedly. The judge sustained. The exchange revealed the district's strategy. Blame poor parents for being poor. A pediatrician testified about treating multiple students for malnutrition and related health issues. She documented cases where children were losing weight because they were too ashamed to eat at school with lunch debt. She'd reported concerns to the district's health coordinator multiple times. Her reports were acknowledged but never acted upon. A forensic accountant analyzed the district's food service budget. The company was charging the district $4.80 per meal, but billing families $6.50. The interest fees had no cost justification. They were pure profit. The whole system was designed to extract maximum money through charges that bore no relationship to actual costs. Families had been overcharged $2.3 million over 6 years. Cafeteria workers testified. 2 women who'd quit rather than continue implementing the debt collection policies. They'd been trained to publicly announce student balances, to deny food to hungry children. One woman broke down crying, said she'd become a cafeteria worker because she wanted to feed children. Instead, she'd been forced to starve them. She'd complained to Mrs. Vance, was told to follow policy or find another job. She'd quit. The district's defense was that they'd operated within the law. Burke's response was that understanding the law required reading it, and the National School Lunch Act was clear that participating schools couldn't charge fees exceeding actual meal costs. The interest fees, late charges, and collection penalties were all illegal. The district had known this because multiple attorneys had warned them. The food service company sent their CFO to testify. Under cross-examination, Burke got him to admit that debt collection from school lunch programs had become their fastest-growing revenue stream, that they'd developed software specifically to maximize debt generation, that their contracts included provisions allowing them to add fees unrelated to meal costs, that they'd trained cafeteria directors to prioritize collections over feeding children. The CFO's deposition had been taken months earlier. Burke had video clips. In one, the CFO described lunch debt as a reliable revenue generator. In another, he laughed about families paying interest on cheese sandwiches. Burke played these clips in the courtroom. The CFO squirmed. Burke asked simple yes or no questions. Did you describe child lunch debt as a revenue generator? Yes. Did you laugh about families paying interest to feed their children? Yes. Principal Novak testified. He'd been subpoenaed. His testimony was evasive, claimed he'd just been following district policy. Burke produced emails showing Novak had enthusiastically supported the debt collection system, had proposed expanding exclusions to more activities, had personally approved Mrs. Vance's bonuses. Novak claimed the emails were taken out of context. Burke read them in full. The context made them worse. The superintendent was smooth, professional, acknowledged that mistakes had been made. Burke produced her performance reviews of Novak and Mrs. Vance. Both praised for their financial management, produced budget documents showing she'd allocated lunch debt revenue to her discretionary fund. She tried to explain these as normal administrative practices. Burke noted that stealing from poor children to balance budgets wasn't normal. It was criminal. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found in favor of the plaintiffs on every count, awarded $45 million in damages, ordered the district to eliminate all existing debt and refund every family who'd paid illegal fees in the past 10 years, ordered the food service company to divest from school lunch operations and pay an additional $30 million. The judge said the conduct represented some of the most callous exploitation of vulnerable families she'd witnessed in 30 years. The victory was massive. Congressional hearings announced within a week. 3 states passed emergency legislation banning school lunch debt. The Department of Agriculture announced a comprehensive review of all school lunch programs and threatened to revoke federal funding from any district charging illegal fees. The system that had hurt Sadie and thousands of other kids was being dismantled. But dismantling was harder than defeating it in court. By September, only half the districts had actually eliminated lunch debt. The others were stalling. The food service company had filed multiple appeals, lost everyone, but the appeals provided cover for districts that didn't want to comply. Some districts tried to comply maliciously. They eliminated lunch debt by eliminating school lunch programs entirely. Burke got court orders forcing them to maintain food service. The cruelty was breathtaking. The media coverage brought unexpected challenges. Conservative media portrayed us as anti-business radicals, said we were teaching children to expect handouts. Comment sections were vicious. People who'd never experienced food insecurity, explaining why hungry children deserved to suffer. Burke started receiving threats, anonymous calls, letters warning him about consequences. His home address was posted online. He hired security. I called Sadie after the verdict. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked what we'd really won. The money wouldn't buy back her childhood. The policy changes wouldn't erase her trauma. The convictions wouldn't restore her trust in institutions. I didn't have a good answer. She said maybe winning wasn't about getting back what was taken. Maybe it was about making sure what happened to us didn't happen to someone else. She told me she'd been working on a policy proposal for universal free school meals. No means testing, no applications, no debt, just food for every student. The research showed it would cost less than what we currently spent administering the complex system of reduced price meals and debt collection. We could feed every child for less money than we spent figuring out which children deserve to be fed. 6 months after the trial, federal legislation was introduced, the Universal School Meals Act, based largely on Sadie's policy proposal. It had bipartisan support, backed by parents' groups, teachers' unions, and children's advocacy organizations. Burke testified before Congress again, bringing trial transcripts and asking whether anyone thought it was good policy to create debt traps for children. The hearings were revealing. Representatives from farm states supported the bill because it would increase demand for agricultural products. Urban representatives supported it because their constituencies included the most affected families. but representatives from wealthy suburbs opposed it, claimed local control should prevail. Burke pointed out that poverty existed everywhere, that children in those communities were suffering quietly. One congressman told a story about his own childhood in poverty. School lunch was often his only meal. He'd gone hungry for 3 months before a teacher helped his mother navigate the system. He said this bill was personal, that we could afford to feed children. We just had to prioritize it. The opposition's arguments were familiar. Cost concerns, dependency fears. One representative argued his grandmother had packed him bologna sandwiches. Another asked how that was relevant. The exchange captured the divide. Sadie testified before a Senate committee. She was nervous but composed, told her story plainly. Several senators asked questions. One asked if she blamed her mother for not paying the debt. Sadie said no. She blamed a system designed to exploit poor families. The senator seemed unsatisfied, moved on. Her testimony was powerful but not persuasive to those determined not to be persuaded. The bill passed the House first, by 13 votes. The Senate was harder, needed 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. We got 62. Barely. When the result came in, we all texted each other. We'd done it. Universal free school meals were about to become law. The bill passed. 3 years of lobbying, compromises, amendments, and advocacy. 3 years of Sadie and others sharing their stories over and over. 3 years of proving that feeding children shouldn't be controversial. Implementation took another 2 years. By the time I finished graduate school, the transformation was complete. 50 million children eating free meals daily, 0 lunch debt. Sadie got her master's degree and was hired by the Department of Agriculture to oversee the Universal School Meals Program implementation. She traveled to districts struggling with the transition, helped them understand that feeding kids wasn't a burden, but a baseline. She was good at it. Patient, but firm. She'd lived the consequences of the old system, and she wouldn't let anyone recreate it. Her first year was overwhelming. Many transitioned smoothly, others resisted every step. Claimed the regulations were burdensome. She'd developed a directness born from experience. Would tell resistant administrators that she'd been the child sitting alone in an auditorium because of policies like theirs. Most backed down when confronted with someone who'd lived the consequences. When a district in Tennessee tried to charge facility fees, she flew there immediately, met with the superintendent, showed him the law. The fees were eliminated within 24 hours. Word spread that the new director wouldn't tolerate workarounds. But the work took its toll. Sadie was traveling constantly. Her daughter started asking why mommy was always gone. Her husband struggled with it too. They had fights about priorities, about whether changing the world was worth sacrificing their family. Implementation challenges continued. Districts in wealthy areas complained that providing free meals to rich families was wasteful. Sadie would explain that universal programs reduced stigma. That means testing cost more than the savings. Some states tried to opt out. The department was clear. Federal funding was contingent on participation. No state opted out. 5 years into implementation, the program served its 5 billionth meal. Each meal represented a child who didn't experience what Sadie had experienced. That mattered. 10 years after that day in the auditorium, Sadie stood in our old middle school. They'd invited her back to speak at an assembly. The principal was new, passionate about equity. She walked Sadie through the school, showing her the cafeteria where every student now ate free meals. The trophy case where they'd added a plaque commemorating the students who'd fought for policy change. The assembly was packed. 8th graders getting ready for their DC trip. Every single one of them going. No debt, no exclusions. Sadie gave a speech about perseverance and systemic change and the importance of fighting for what's right. She didn't mention her own exclusion. The kids in that audience would never know what she'd sacrificed to ensure they'd never face the same choice. After the assembly, a girl approached her, asked if it was true that students used to be excluded from field trips over lunch debt. Sadie said yes. The girl looked confused, said that seemed cruel. Sadie agreed, said it was cruel, said that's why people had fought to change it. The girl thanked her for making sure she could go on the trip. Sadie told her to enjoy Washington, D.C., to remember that none of it should be taken for granted. Last month, my nephew graduated from 8th grade, went on the Washington, D.C. trip, sent me pictures from the Lincoln Memorial. I thought about Sadie, about how my nephew's ability to go was directly connected to her inability to go 15 years earlier, about how his freedom was purchased with her trauma. I texted Sadie the photos. She responded immediately, said she was happy my nephew got to go. No bitterness, just genuine happiness that the system worked better now. We met for dinner that weekend, first time in person in almost a year. She looked tired, happy but tired, the exhaustion that comes from meaningful work that never stops. We talked about her daughter's school, about my nephew's trip, about districts still trying to find loopholes, about how victory in court didn't mean victory in every cafeteria. She told me something she hadn't shared before, that she still had nightmares about the auditorium. Not as often, maybe once a month instead of weekly, but they never completely stopped. Sometimes she'd try to run after the buses. Her legs wouldn't move. Sometimes she'd scream. No sound would come out. Sometimes she'd age and fast forward, still sitting in that auditorium, still excluded. She'd wake up crying, the reminder that trauma doesn't end. It just becomes background noise you learn to function through. I asked if the work was worth it. She thought for a long time, said she didn't know how to measure worth, that millions of children eating freely was objectively valuable. That her daughter seeing less of her was objectively costly, that she couldn't weigh those against each other, that maybe it wasn't about worth, maybe it was about necessity, about doing what needed to be done because no one else would. She'd been thinking about stepping back, transitioning to a less intense role. Her daughter was getting older. Sadie had missed too many moments, but she couldn't commit to stepping back. Every time she decided, another compliance violation would emerge, another child being harmed, and she'd be pulled back in. Because she knew what that child was experiencing, because she'd sat alone in an auditorium, because she couldn't watch it happen to someone else and do nothing. She stood by her car door and said something I'll never forget. She said she used to think justice meant getting back what was taken. That if she worked hard enough, she could reclaim that 8th grade trip, that the monuments she never saw would materialize. She'd spent years learning in therapy that it didn't work that way, that her trip was gone, that justice wasn't restoration, it was prevention, making sure what happened to her didn't happen to others. That was the only revenge available. Millions of children would never sit alone in auditoriums. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. Some stories end with dramatic justice and clear victories. This one ended with the quiet sound of children eating lunch, with a woman who'd been hurt as a child learning to prevent that hurt from spreading to the next generation. Sadie never got her 8th grade trip back, but millions of children would never sit alone in auditoriums over lunch debt. That was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but undeniably better than what came before. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.